Well, thank you very much. I too would like to congratulate Korea, not so much for being 60, but for what Korea has achieved during those 60 years, which is indeed remarkable. The topic of what I would like to talk about actually is the relationship between economics and politics, which I think is a major subject. And what is going to happen in the next few years very much depends on how the mechanics of economics and politics develop. In fact, I have found, and I'm very happy about it, but I have found that the tone of our discussion since this morning is very optimistic, and I'm glad about it. However, I'm not sure that things will evolve in the nice way we all have in mind. In fact, if the crisis, if the financial and economic crisis deepens, we could be in deeper troubles, not only economically, but politically. And precisely because we want to avoid that, we have to look at it squarely. In fact, what has happened in the last few months has undermined trust in a very deep sense. It has undermined trust in market economy, and it has undermined trust in democracy. If you look at my country is France. Today, you know, France had made a lot of progress towards economic liberalism, but today the voices of the archaic socialists are very much being heard again. And this, you know, the criticism, the simplistic criticisms of market economy are now very vocal. The fact is that the market system in the financial system has collapsed entirely. It is the market which has collapsed. When supply and demand no longer meet together, something is basically wrong. And I think we should not also underestimate the distrust of democracy which is now spreading over the world. I organized a conference 2 weeks ago in Evian in France, which was attended by about 10 heads of states and government. And we heard the representative of the president of Mexico, who was telling us that democracy is receding. That is, the legitimacy of democracy is put into question more and more in Latin America. So the idea that democracy is necessarily gaining room in the world, this is just empirically wrong. And I think Francis Fukuyama is not in the room this afternoon, but I would say that what I call his equation of the end of history, of course his arguments are much more sophisticated, but you know, what the people have kept in their mind is what I call the equation of the end of history, something like this, you know, democracy plus market economy gives peace and prosperity. Unfortunately, this either is a tautology or is wrong. The problem is not that democracy plus market economy gives peace and prosperity. The problem is how do you get to democracy? How do you organize market economy properly? And of course, if everything works well, everything works well. That is, if the premises are okay, the conclusions are okay. But if democracy is difficult to reach, and if market economy does not work in certain circumstances, you do not have the benefits, peace and prosperity. And since precisely things have not been functioning well in the past few months, not to say years, what we are witnessing is the talk about return of protectionism, the possible returns of beggar thy neighbor policies, the kind of things that we have seen in the 30s. And beggar thy neighbor's policies can also be achieved through manipulation of exchange rates, which of course is extremely dangerous. And at the same time, politically, nationalism, nationalist forces. Look at what could happen in China. Suppose that the growth rate in China was cut by half. Today, you know, the legitimacy of the Communist Party in China relies entirely on the continuation of economic growth. And if they had a major economic crisis in China, there is no doubt, in my judgment, that we would have a huge wave of political nationalism in China with immense consequences. So we should also all remember that the tragedies of last century, of the interwar period, resulted from a combination of economic failures and political failures. The economic failures were themselves the combination of the financial bubbles of the 20s, of monetary mistakes, major monetary mistakes, and in the monetary management, and beggar thy neighbor's policies. It was the combination of these three things which led to the economic depression. Can we avoid this today? I hope the answer is yes, but I am not totally sure, because today, ladies and gentlemen, whether we like it or not, we have the impression that there is no pilot in the boat. Today, the mechanisms do not work that well. And even though some progress has been made in the last few weeks, it's not enough to organize meetings of leaders who just meet and talk to re-establish credibility. So they have to take appropriate measures, and I am not sure that the appropriate measures have all already been taken. So how can we avoid this, the worst? It is, I agree, that leadership is important, but leadership and governance are complementary goods. It's not enough for somebody to come up. Take Mr. Sarkozy, for instance, in France. He's very dynamic. I know that here in Korea, he's very much admired, and President Im Yoon-bak likes, I understand, to feel of himself as somebody like Sarkozy. And I understand that he's very dynamic, very active, but it's not enough, you know. It's not enough to have 1, 2, or 3 very active leaders. They have to work together well, and they have to know what has to be done. So the problem is really governance, and governance is in economics and governance in politics. And I would like to conclude these short remarks with 3 points. First, we have to acknowledge the fact that the world system today, the international system, is both and has become both multipolar and heterogeneous. Multipolar, I mean that the kind of unilateralism that we have lived under George W. Bush is finished, full stop. Whoever is elected president of the United States next week, the world will be different, and the next president will have to take into account seriously the rest of the world. And heterogeneous is a more subtle argument. It means that whether we like it or not, we cannot expect in the foreseeable future all countries in the world to be Western-like democracies. We have to recognize that fact. You know, and even during the Soviet Union times, we used to have cooperative frameworks with the Soviet Union between the East and the West. So why shouldn't we work positively with countries which do not share entirely or share yet our values or our political system? And there is much too much ideology today floating in the air in the West in particular. When we talk about China, when we talk about Russia, when we talk about India and other countries, we seem to give lessons, to be lecturing constantly all the other countries of what they should do. This is not acceptable. If our forms of values, our the forms of democracy spread, it will be the consequence of the good examples we give, not the consequence of the lectures we pretend to impose on other countries. So we have to work together, even though we do not agree on values and so forth and so on. It's a fundamental point. Second, I think that we have to recognize that the world governance, be it in economic field or in political field, has to involve everybody, not only the big countries, also the small countries. Good ideas is not the privilege or is not only the resource of big countries. Small countries may have sometimes very good ideas, and they should contribute to the governance of the world. And if they do not do it, they will not accept the rules, because they will consider that those rules are being imposed on them. And this leads me to my third point, which is regional and global. You know, we have to have global mechanisms. For instance, in economic field, the strengthening the IMF, I think, is an obvious case. In the political arena, strengthening or bettering the United Nations system is certainly necessary, but this is not enough, because if we want to achieve anything, we have to start at the regional level. Take, for instance, the Korea issue. The group of 6 is clearly the relevant group. If you take the Middle East, how can we expect to improve the situation in the Middle East if we do not embark Iran on board? You know, it's one example among many. We have to combine, you know, local and global, regional and universal. These are just a few remarks, just to remind all of us that I think, I hope, I trust that we will avoid the worst. The worst would be the return to some kind of interwar situation. But in order to avoid that, we have to face the possibility that it could happen. Thank you.